Sea wind howling. Waves crash against a distant hull. Low sonar hum builds beneath silence. The Arabian Sea was dark that night. Darker than ink. Darker than fate itself. In the cold waters near the coast of Visakhapatnam, a ghost silently drifted beneath the waves. Its metallic body groaned under pressure, its engines whispering the last verses of a doomed voyage. It was December 1971, and deep below the surface, the Pakistani submarine PNS Ghazi was breathing its final moments. No one on land knew it yet, but the world's first underwater grave of the Indo-Pak War had already been sealed. Inside, 43 men, sailors, engineers, dreamers, patriots, waited in silence as fate prepared to crush steel, bone, and memory together. Echoing heartbeat. In that silence, the ghosts of ambition whispered, because Ghazi was not just a submarine, she was a promise, a weapon of vengeance, a story that began not in the sea, but in the ambitions of a nation still bleeding from partition. Rewind sound. The year was 1947. The subcontinent had been torn in half. India had inherited a large fleet from the British Empire, Pakistan barely a fraction. But even then, in the dust and chaos of Karachi's docks, a dream began to form, a dream of matching the power of a giant with a navy born out of scraps. From the beginning, Pakistan's navy was the smallest child in the family of its armed forces. It had no aircraft carriers, no submarines, and few ships worth the name. Yet among the few who believed, there was a whisper. One day, we'll rule the depths. Steel clanging. By the 1950s, that whisper turned into strategy. Pakistan sought allies, and found one across the world in the United States. Under the SEATO and CENTO alliances, American naval doctrine began flowing into Karachi, but the Americans were cautious. They armed Pakistan but never fully trusted it. What Pakistan wanted most in a submarine would not come easily. So the dream drifted until the 1960s, when a deal was struck. The Americans agreed to lease a submarine, a powerful long-range beast originally built as the USS Diablo during World War II. When it reached Karachi in 1964, it bore a new name, PNS Ghazi, the Holy Warrior. She was old but massive, a Tench-class submarine built for the Pacific War, now reborn under a new flag. Her very presence made Pakistan the first South Asian navy to operate a submarine. And overnight Ghazi became a symbol of pride and fear. Chorus of sailors cheering. The crew that served on her was handpicked, the best of Pakistan's young naval generation. Among them was a man who would define Ghazi's destiny, Commander Zafar Muhammad Khan, proud, calm, and precise. A man of discipline forged in silence. He believed the ocean itself spoke to those who dared to listen. For years, Ghazi patrolled silently through Arabian waters, gathering intelligence, testing depth, mastering stealth. She was not the fastest nor the newest, but she was a veteran of the deep, patient and powerful. Then came 1965. The war that would awaken every sleeping rivalry in South Asia. The Indian Navy remained largely defensive, protecting its coastlines, while the Pakistan Navy sought to make its mark. Ghazi, though limited by range, played her role in reconnaissance and patrol, but she saw no major combat. And in her captain's eyes, that war left an ache, the kind of ache soldiers feel when a battle passes without testing their courage. When the guns of 1965 fell silent, the real war, the invisible one, began. Espionage, preparation, propaganda, and pride became the new weapons. Pakistan knew that the next war would come not from the west, but from the east. Eerie drone builds, because in East Pakistan, modern-day Bangladesh, a storm was brewing. The people of East Pakistan, culturally and linguistically different from the West, had begun to rebel against what they saw as political oppression. The Awami League's leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, demanded autonomy. The situation grew darker by the month. India, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, began supporting the Mukti Bahini, Bengali guerrilla forces fighting against Pakistan's army in the east. By 1971, the entire subcontinent was a ticking bomb. The Pakistani military knew that if India intervened directly, it would have to fight on two fronts, an impossible nightmare for any army. The Navy's solution was clear. If the enemy strikes from the east, strike back in the sea. That was where Ghazi's legend was born, and where it would die. Low sonar ping. When war seemed inevitable in late 1971, Pakistan's Naval High Command planned a daring move. The Indian aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, stationed in the Eastern Theater, was the pride of India's Navy. Destroying it would cripple India's morale and give Pakistan an upper hand. But Vikrant was heavily guarded. Reaching it required sailing thousands of miles, across enemy waters, around the southern tip of India, into the Bay of Bengal. It was suicidal. But Ghazi volunteered. Commander Zafar knew the risks. Ghazi was old, over 25 years of service, her systems worn, her batteries tired. She wasn't built for such a long voyage. Yet when the order came, the crew saluted without hesitation. Metallic echo, hatch closing. On November 14, 1971, Ghazi quietly left Karachi port. The night air smelled of salt and fuel. Families waved from the docks, unaware it was the last time they'd see their loved ones alive. The submarine slipped beneath the waves, a steel coffin bound for destiny. As she descended, the lights inside dimmed. The air thickened with the scent of oil and metal. 43 men disappeared into the silence of the deep, trusting one another and a machine older than themselves. The mission: reach the Bay of Bengal undetected, lay mines near Visakhapatnam, and hunt down INS Vikrant. Deep ocean hum, sound of sonar pulse echoing through darkness, a faint heartbeat underneath, slow, haunting. The sea is a cruel historian. It keeps its secrets buried, sealed in salt and silence. When PNS Ghazi disappeared off the coast of Visakhapatnam, the ocean swallowed not just a submarine, it swallowed a mystery that would divide two nations for decades. Morning came softly over the Bay of Bengal. The fishermen of Andhra Pradesh found the water stained with oil. Metallic fragments floated between the nets. Scorched rubber, twisted steel, scraps of human life. News spread fast. By noon, Indian naval divers were dispatched. Beneath the surface, they discovered what looked like a gigantic wound in the earth. And within it, the shattered remains of Ghazi, water bubbling sounds. The hull was torn open, plates peeled like paper, the bow section completely destroyed, bodies, unrecognizable, trapped inside a labyrinth of mangled steel. To the Indian Navy, this was victory. To Pakistan, a catastrophe wrapped in confusion. But to history, it was a riddle. Radio static reports reached Karachi through encrypted channels. Ghazi, missing. At first, the message was disbelieved. Then came the Indian press conferences, boasting of a great naval triumph, claiming their destroyer, INS Rajput, had detected and destroyed Ghazi with depth charges. In New Delhi, celebrations erupted. Headlines screamed, "Ghazi destroyed," but in Karachi, silence. In the naval headquarters, officers stared at the map of the Bay of Bengal, a long red line ending abruptly near Visakhapatnam. Commander Zafar and his crew were gone. The pride of the fleet vanished without even a signal. Low lamenting flute begins. Pakistan's navy was built on morale, on the belief that the few could stand against the many. But the death of Ghazi struck at the heart of that belief. How could the ocean's most feared hunter die so quietly? And so began the hunt for the truth, one that would blur lines between courage, deception, and fate. While India celebrated its naval defense, whispers grew in the corridors of Visakhapatnam. Divers and engineers who saw the wreck up close began noticing inconsistencies: the direction of the blast, the state of the hull, the position of the debris. It didn't match the story of an external attack. If INS Rajput had sunk Ghazi, the damage would have been outside in. But what they saw was the opposite. The explosion came from within, echoing metallic clangs under pressure. A mine, an internal detonation, perhaps one of Ghazi's own weapons, misfired, mishandled, or triggered by accident, and yet, others whispered something darker. What if it wasn't an accident? What if Ghazi had been baited? Indian intelligence, even before the war began, had deliberately moved INS Vikrant, the carrier Ghazi was hunting, far away from Visakhapatnam. It was hiding in the Andaman Islands, under strict radio silence. Fake messages, false reports, and planted radio chatter were broadcast to mislead Ghazi, luring her into a deadly trap of shallow waters and confusion. Commander Zafar, unaware of the deception, believed Vikrant was near, and in chasing a ghost, Ghazi had sailed straight into her grave. Whisper of sonar ping fading into silence. The wreck was later dragged to the surface, what remained of it. The sight shocked even seasoned sailors. The forward torpedo room was gone. There were shattered oxygen cylinders, bent propellers, ripped panels, signs of massive internal pressure. Every man aboard had died instantly. The Indian Navy conducted ceremonies, both to honor its own victory and to acknowledge the bravery of its enemy. The dead were given a silent salute. In Pakistan, the news was received like a dagger in the heart. Families waited for weeks for official word. Mothers refused to believe it. Wives clutched photos. Some still wrote letters addressed to Commander Zafar, PNS Ghazi, Bay of Bengal, knowing they'd never be delivered. Soft rain over Karachi harbor. A Navy funeral was held without bodies. The sea was their grave. The flag of Pakistan hung at half-mast, rippling in the monsoon wind. No one spoke loudly. Even the gulls seemed muted that day. But behind closed doors, a storm brewed in the minds of officers and engineers. They needed answers, not only for honor, but for history. Why did Ghazi explode? Was it an Indian attack? Or had time itself betrayed her, her aging machinery, her worn batteries, her fragile hull? To understand that, one must return to Ghazi's final hours, the part of her voyage history could only imagine. Inside that submarine, life was suffocating. The air recycled again and again, sweat, fuel, fear, all mixed into one choking breath. Commander Zafar's eyes were fixed on his sonar screen. Each blip, each echo could mean life or death. The crew were exhausted, but their discipline was unbroken. They had reached Visakhapatnam, and the captain had ordered preparations to lay mines. But the ocean near that coast was treacherously shallow, less than 40 meters deep in places. A submarine that size had no room to maneuver. Every sound, every vibration could trigger disaster, metal creaking under pressure. The crew worked in darkness, loading the mines. A sudden fluctuation in depth, a faulty valve, or a misfire, any could ignite the explosives. Then came the unconfirmed reports of an approaching Indian destroyer. Maybe Ghazi dove too fast, maybe she tried to evade and hit the seabed, or maybe, as some Indian records claim, INS Rajput dropped a depth charge after detecting sonar activity, unknowingly setting off Ghazi's own mines. The truth sank with her. And to this day, historians remain divided. But while the politicians argued, the war above the sea raged on. The sea had closed its mouth. The wreck of PNS Ghazi rested on the ocean floor, silent, fractured, half buried in silt. But above those depths, one man refused to let the silence win. Lieutenant Pervez, once a navigation officer aboard Ghazi, had narrowly missed being part of the final voyage. Reassigned to Karachi just weeks before departure, he had watched his brothers in arms sail away, proud, fearless, unknowing. When the telegram arrived, Ghazi lost with all hands. Pervez stood in the corridor, frozen. The world blurred. In that moment, he felt not relief but guilt, survivor's guilt. The sound that haunted him wasn't an explosion. It was the echo of 43 names he knew by heart, men he had shared bread with, laughed with, fought with. He couldn't sleep, couldn't move on. So he did the only thing he could. He began to search. In the archives of Karachi's Naval Intelligence Office, Pervez started digging through Ghazi's maintenance logs. He noticed what no one wanted to admit. The submarine had been struggling long before her final mission. Her batteries, crucial for underwater endurance, were nearing the end of their lifespan. Her hull, weakened by years of pressure cycles, had shown early signs of metal fatigue. Her internal wiring, old, brittle, and patched together with improvisations. Ghazi was a veteran, but she was aging, and yet she was sent on the most dangerous mission in Pakistan's naval history. Pervez's voice trembled as he whispered to himself, "We sent her to die. But why? Why risk her at all?" The answer, he realized, wasn't just military. It was psychological. After 1965, Pakistan's pride rested heavily on Ghazi's legend. She was the first submarine in the region, the silent hunter that gave Pakistan a sense of parity with India. To admit she was outdated would have been to admit weakness, and weakness was forbidden. So the Navy rolled the dice. They gambled steel against pride, and lost. Meanwhile, in India, the story of Ghazi's destruction had become a national triumph. The newspapers praised the valiant action of the Indian Navy. Commander Inder Singh of INS Rajput was hailed as a hero. But beneath the official story, questions grew. A few Indian divers and engineers who examined the wreck privately noted something odd. The pattern of the explosion didn't suggest a direct hit. The outer hull showed signs of outward deformation, meaning the blast had come from inside the submarine, not from an external charge. Still, no one dared challenge the official narrative. The war had just ended. Bangladesh had been born. India was victorious. And in victory, questions are dangerous. But in Karachi, questions were all that remained. Pervez began corresponding secretly with Indian veterans through unofficial channels, piecing together testimonies. He found records of radio intercepts, depth charge patterns, and coordinates. The timeline didn't match India's claim. Rajput had arrived at Visakhapatnam after Ghazi's explosion was detected, not before. So if Rajput didn't sink Ghazi, who did? Perhaps no one. Perhaps she had sunk herself. The most likely explanation, Pervez wrote in his journal, was this. As Ghazi prepared to lay mines near the harbor mouth, one of the mines may have detonated prematurely, either due to faulty wiring, pressure miscalculation, or collision with the seabed. The shockwave triggered the secondary explosions of the torpedoes inside the forward section, blowing the submarine apart. Instant death. No time to escape. No distress signal, just a flash, and eternal silence. But Pervez's investigation went deeper because he wanted to understand why that happened. And what he uncovered was chilling. He found an internal communication between high-ranking naval officers dated November 1971, before Ghazi sailed. It warned of malfunctioning depth sensors and pressure fluctuations during training dives. The engineers recommended delaying deployment until repairs were complete. But those warnings were ignored. Why? Because the war was coming, and delay meant losing initiative. The order went out. Ghazi must sail at once. The honor of the fleet depends on her success. Pervez read those words again and again, tears welling in his eyes. Honor. It was the word that killed them all. By 1973, 2 years after the war, Pervez published a confidential internal report, marked top secret, detailing everything he'd found. He concluded that Ghazi had been lost due to either a combination of mechanical failure and operational miscalculation under wartime stress. But the report was buried. The higher command didn't want to reopen wounds. They wanted martyrs, not mistakes. And so, truth drowned again, this time in bureaucracy. Still, Pervez couldn't stop searching. He visited the families of Ghazi's crew. He met the widow of Commander Zafar. She showed him the last letter she received before the mission. It was written in elegant Urdu, the ink slightly faded. Zafar's handwriting steady, calm. Do not worry, my love. The sea has been kind to me all my life. If I do not return, tell our son that his father sleeps beneath the waves, guarding the motherland still. That letter broke Pervez. He wept not just for his captain, but for every man aboard that submarine. Men who believed in orders, in duty, in promises made by those far above the waves. But history, as always, moves on. By the late 1970s, Pakistan rebuilt its naval fleet. New submarines arrived. French-made, modern, sleek. Yet none carried the same aura as Ghazi. The sailors still spoke of her in hushed tones, as if she were a spirit that still patrolled the sea at night. They said on some nights, near Karachi's coast, sonar operators would hear faint echoes, signals that didn't belong to any ship or submarine. They called it the Ghazi ping, a ghost in the deep. Across the border, India too revisited the wreck. In 2003, a new generation of divers reached the remnants near Visakhapatnam. The sea had claimed most of it, rusted, broken, half consumed by coral. But among the debris they found something human, a rusted wristwatch still strapped to a skeletal arm. The time had stopped at 0.15 hours, the minute Ghazi died. The Indian Navy later erected a memorial near the harbor, the Ghazi Martyrs Memorial, honoring both their own sailors and the men of the submarine they defeated, because even enemies, when buried together by the sea, share the same silence. Meanwhile, Pervez, now older, still couldn't rest. He spent his life advocating for the recognition of Ghazi's crew, not as victims of failure but as symbols of courage. He wrote, "History may debate how Ghazi died, but none can debate how she lived, with pride, discipline, and a heart made of steel." And yet, even in his final years, Pervez would stare at the sea from Karachi's breakwater and whisper, "Tell me, Captain, was what really happened down there?" But the sea never answers questions, it only keeps secrets. And somewhere in those depths, the twisted hull of Ghazi still sleeps, rusted, silent, but eternal. Because legends do not drown, they just descend. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with her yet. Because decades later, a forgotten piece of classified intelligence would resurface, and with it, a revelation that could change everything the world believed about Ghazi's last night. The hidden transmission, low hum of sonar deep beneath the waves, faint Morse clicks, a distant thunder rolls above water, fading into the silence of the deep. Time erases wounds, but not ghosts. Decades had passed since that night off Visakhapatnam. The world had moved on, new wars, new alliances, new oceans to cross. But for those who still remembered the name Ghazi, the sea had never gone quiet. Every few years, whispers would return, stories of strange sonar echoes, unmarked wreck fragments, radio anomalies that defied explanation. And then, one day, a file resurfaced. Drawer opens, papers shuffle. In 1999, while the Kargil conflict dominated headlines, an aging archivist in Karachi's Naval Records Department stumbled upon a folder misfiled decades earlier. Stamped in red ink, classified, GH-47, DEC-71. Inside were radio transcripts, decryption sheets, and a single reel of magnetic tape marked Emergency Transmission, December 3, 1971. No one had listened to it since the war. When the archivist reported it to his superiors, the Navy decided to digitize the tape before it degraded. A group of technicians gathered in a dim room, the air thick with dust and the hum of old machinery. As the reel spun, a static hiss filled the speakers. Then faintly through the crackle, a voice. Radio static builds, faint Urdu words fade in. "This is Ghazi. Coordinates. 38 point. Malfunction. Pressure. May God." The rest was lost in distortion, swallowed by static. But that one phrase, malfunction, pressure, may God, sent a chill through everyone in the room. It meant Ghazi had tried to send a message. She hadn't died instantly. Long pause, faint echo of the sea. A secret inquiry began quietly, supervised by a retired admiral who had once served under Commander Zafar. The transmission logs from the Indian side were also re-examined, and there buried deep in the archives of the Eastern Naval Command, an Indian technician's note from the same night was found. Detected short burst on 6 MHz, believed to be Morse distress, could not triangulate. The two signals matched. For the first time, there was proof that Ghazi had transmitted a final message, a dying breath in radio waves. Soft heartbeat. Lieutenant Pervez, now an old man, was invited to review the findings. He listened to the crackling audio with trembling hands. Tears welled as he whispered. He was alive. Till the last second. For Pervez, it wasn't just evidence. It was closure. Proof that his captain had fought till the end, not surrendered to fate. He began reconstructing those final minutes based on the data, depth, time, coordinates, and what remained of the message. His theory was harrowing. At approximately 0.10 hours, Ghazi began laying mines near the entrance to Visakhapatnam harbor. The pressure differential between the shallow seabed and the internal ballast tanks caused a sudden vibration. A faulty valve triggered an explosion in the forward torpedo room, but the blast didn't destroy her immediately. It crippled her. For a few desperate minutes, Commander Zafar and his crew fought to stabilize the submarine. Amid the chaos, sparks, smoke, flooding compartments, someone reached for the radio. Rapid beeping Morse fades under narration. That was the message recorded on the tape, the last human voice from beneath those waters. Then, another explosion, the final one, and silence. Wind howls over the sea. The rediscovery of that transmission reignited old debates in both nations. Some in India insisted it changed nothing. Ghazi was still the hunter who became the hunted. But in Pakistan, the recording spread through the naval community like a sacred relic. To them, it proved the submarine had died in battle, not by blunder. Yet, for historians, another detail of the file stood out, one that hinted at something darker. Among the papers in that misfiled folder was a memo dated November 28, 1971, 5 days before Ghazi's destruction. It referenced a coded intercept, a radio signal believed to have been sent to Ghazi from an unidentified source near the Bay of Bengal. The origin was never confirmed. Who sent it? Was it a decoy transmission, part of India's deception plan, or something else entirely? Perhaps an unintended signal that drew Ghazi into danger. Static crackles again, faint deep tone rising. Pervez spent his remaining years trying to decode that riddle. He contacted veterans from both sides, combed through declassified archives, and even visited Visakhapatnam under a special peace initiative. Standing by the memorial that bore his comrades' names, he placed his hand on the cold stone and said softly, "Forgive us for letting politics bury the truth." Soft waves wash against rocks. He believed that hidden transmission wasn't merely a tactical misdirection. It was a tragic echo of human arrogance. Both sides had turned the ocean into a chessboard, and 43 lives had become pawns. Soft cello music begins. Years later, after Pervez passed away, his daughter published his journals. In the final entry, written weeks before his death, he wrote, "Perhaps Ghazi was never destroyed by man or machine. Perhaps the sea itself, tired of our pride, demanded silence. The ocean buries everything, lies, victories, and the truth alike." Those words resonated deeply. In Pakistan, naval cadets began reciting a line from his journal during training. "Remember Ghazi, not for how she died, but for how she sailed." And across the border, Indian officers too would pause before their dives near Visakhapatnam, saluting the spot where steel and courage met the abyss. Enemies in life, brothers in the deep. Thunder rumbles softly in distance. Today, the wreck of PNS Ghazi still lies beneath 38 meters of murky water, half buried in sand and coral. The sea has turned her steel into rust, her rivets into dust, but her story still echoes through every sonar pulse that crosses those waters. Divers say that when you descend near the wreck at night, you can hear it. A faint hum, like an old engine trying to start, or maybe a voice whispering through the current. Soft whispering tone, unintelligible. Some say it's just the current. Others aren't so sure, because the sea remembers. It always remembers. But before history could rest, one final piece would emerge, a discovery that would connect Ghazi's death to a far wider conspiracy, one that reached beyond the ocean, into the heart of politics and pride itself. Low-rising tension, heartbeat quickens, a revelation hidden for 50 years, waiting in the depths to surface at last.